Welcome to another student edition of Great Books, featuring a panel of local students sharing their interest in classic literature. Here's your moderator, Jack Hatfield.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us for the Great Book Show Student Edition. I'm Jack Hatfield. Our panel meets periodically to discuss great works of classic and modern literature. Tonight we'll be discussing Albert Camus' essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. Camus was born in Algeria in 1913 and died in 1960. He wrote The Myth of Sisyphus in 1942. Camus has won the Nobel Prize for Literature. This essay is a discussion of the great myth of Sisyphus, who is punished by having to roll a rock up a mountain only to have it roll back down again to the bottom when it reaches the top. He has to do this again and again for all eternity. Camus claims that Sisyphus is the ideal absurd hero and that his punishment is representative of the human condition. Sisyphus must struggle for all times without hope of success. The underlying question Camus asks is how we accept and live in a world devoid of meaning or purpose. Several times during this essay, Camus calls the hero Sisyphus an absurd hero. What does he mean by absurd hero?
Well, I think that the concept of absurdity is really present in this piece, and as Sisyphus is the main subject, I think absurd comes to mean that he is a hero in the sense that his actions are meaningless, but nonetheless he's still a hero. So absurd as the adjective in this clause would mean he's doing something heroic, doing something worth applauding, but his actions in the end have no true meaning or purpose, but that doesn't make them any less heroic.
I would agree that the term absurd speaks to kind of a certain sense of meaninglessness and that there's no rationality to any of it. Like, I'm obviously rolling a rock uphill repeatedly only to have it come down. That's pointless. But also at the same time, it kind of speaks to meaning within the meaninglessness. Because, like you said, at the same time, he is a hero. He's finding, there is, in a sense, a purpose.
I think a lot of it is Camus commenting on how when you're reading the piece, you, in a way, think of Sisyphus as a hero, but really it's kind of absurd because he's not necessarily saving anything, and there's no real logic behind the way you see him as a hero, but he's kind of, as you read it, you can relate to it and you see how he's overcoming something, but really, in the end, it has no purpose.
Why does he say that the pushing the rock up the hill is not the heroic part? It's the walking down, and he's talking about consciousness is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think about the important thing about him, about coming back to get the rock, is that it's the point that he's still trying, that he hasn't just collapsed on the ground and because he's horribly depressed, that he's still acting. And I think that's a large point of this, what Camus is saying, that the way to find purpose within the meaninglessness is to act, is to still find hope within the nothing.
I think with coming back down being the important part is the consciousness, as you mentioned, being aware of the hopelessness of a situation, being aware of the pointlessness or the meaninglessness. That is the true important part. It isn't the action that is important, it's the perseverance through being aware of the just like desperate, unsolvable quality of your situation. So what makes Sisyphus a true hero is that he is aware of his situation, he knows that it's pointless and that it is meaningless, but he still perseveres through this, and on his way back down is when he has the chance to think about this because he is not occupied by pushing the rock up. So that is the actual, it isn't an action, but his thoughts are what turn him into a hero, or is what is the true meaning of the piece.
I definitely agree with Katie. It's the idea that as he's struggling to push the rock up, he doesn't have time to do anything but push that rock up that hill, because that's where all its energy is focused. But on the way back down, he has time to actually exist. This is him being self-realized. That's the time he has to think about himself and his situation and analyze and understand where he is. And so that's what makes that so important, because without it, if he was just endlessly pushing a rock up forever, he would never have time to think about it, and it would just wind up being the same thing over and over. But that adds change and cycle to the pattern.
Now, Camus says something like this is just like us in society, where we're performing a meaningless act. And why? I mean, just think of our lives or people you know. Why is that? If you're going to have a job, you're studying now, you have a job, you're going to die. That's not very pleasant to think about.
Well, I think acknowledging the absurdity of your situation, as we are also in a constant struggle. While it's not as literal as pushing a rock up the hill and coming back down, as humans we're always facing the next obstacle or adversity in our lives. The purpose of it is that being self-aware and being conscious of the absurdity of your life actually is liberating and gives us the freedom to do as we please. So even though we know that there is probably no point to it all and that it's meaningless, as Sisyphus also knows, by acknowledging this and by truly understanding this and being conscious of it, we can choose to live our lives because it is all we have and it is our own, and through that, that's what makes life have meaning and meaningless, is finding a meaning within yourself instead of trying to find it in some larger concept, trying to make something for your own life.
Cool, yeah.
I think it definitely is a very relatable thing in the modern world, because being able to see how small our world is in comparison to our entire galaxy, it makes you sit there and think, wow, I'm just this tiny little ant in this giant universe. And so nothing really matters, but at the same time, you have to realize that it does in a way matter, because it matters to you. You have to find that purpose for yourself and create that purpose for yourself. You have to decide, I'm going to do this because I feel it's important, instead of saying, oh, I should do this because this is what this is what I have to do, because this is what everyone tells me I have to do, and this is what I have to do because this is how I get into heaven, or what God wants me to do. It's the idea of, I'm doing this because as a small speck on this planet, no one else cares what I do, so I might as well just do what I think is best.
I really like what you said about the idea that it's all I have, that maybe your life is ultimately meaningless, that you go, you're born, you go to school, you go to work, you die. But I think at the same time, you have to find some sort of self-validation, that you have to step back and realize, okay, this is what's going to happen to me just like everyone else. I have to find some way to that when my small, meaningless life is over, that I, as an individual, can be happy with it.
Is he saying that life is meaningless, or is he saying, what I heard you two say was individuals can give their life meaning, right?
Yeah, I think, for me at least, I believe that he is saying life overall probably has no meaning, has no point, but as individuals, as humans with our own minds and our own beliefs, if we accept that, and if we are truly conscious that there probably is no meaning, we can find meaning, which some people would call happiness, through experience and through just being intelligent and coming upon our own meaning.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that everything is meaningless, it's that everything doesn't necessarily have a large effect on the outer world, in a way. It's, we, as a planet, we don't necessarily affect all of the, planets around us, and so in this little society inside of it, we have to decide to find our own purpose and enjoyment, even though overall we can think, oh, well, this is meaningless. But the way to deal with that meaninglessness is to find your own meaning, which may not necessarily be like a true meaning or purpose, but it's what you feel is right, even if it's not necessarily the purpose or meaning of life.
Okay, here would be an example. You got one person who has found meaning in their life through religion or humanism or whatever, and has gone through life then and never realized that absurdity. Why is Camus saying that consciousness of absurdity is important?
No, you go ahead.
Because only by realizing that absurdity can you truly find clarity. Because while he's saying that maybe things are pointless, he's not understanding that you can't understand them, and that by realizing the absurdity is the only way you can really grasp life, and that by grasping that aspect is the only way you can find some measure of honest fulfillment. Because otherwise it is, to an extent, he's saying, an illusion if you don't realize the absurdity.
I think it also has to do with the concept of struggle in the piece. With Sisyphus, the entire trek up the mountain is a constant struggle and pain. And with someone who has found meaning in their life, but through religion or through humanism, but they haven't recognized the absurdity of life, they still have that hope. They still have that imagining something better than their own lives, and a concept of like heaven or something like that. Whereas if you acknowledge the concept of absurdity and you are extremely conscious of it and understand it, you sort of have a way to take away the power from struggle. So struggle causes pain within our own lives, but if you are conscious that is absurd and that it doesn't have meaning, then you can take away the power of struggle and pain, because you can acknowledge that there might not be anything better because it is meaningless and it's pointless, which is sort of depressing, but it's also a way to take power away from pain.
It's kind of like the way where if someone else has something better than you, you want that thing. Even if you didn't know that thing existed before, as soon as you know what they have is better, you want that. It's being aware and thinking, oh, there's something better out there. But this is a weird connection, I feel like, but like in North Korea, they have no idea what's going on in the outside world. They're like, well, this is how the world is. This is fine. Yeah. But if they were able to see how the rest of the world was living, they'd be like, oh, this is not okay. It's the sort of thing where it's thinking there's something else grander and better for you makes pain seem kind of in a way both more difficult and less difficult. And it's more like in the end you'll be disappointed. That's what he's trying to say from his perspective, is that it may make it easier while you're there, but in the end when you don't get the thing that you thought was better, you'll be more disappointed.
I think he's speaking to the benefits of being honest with yourself, and because people can lie to themselves, they can make themselves think that something's really better than it is, or that something's okay. And I think he's definitely speaking, Camus, he's speaking against that unless you kind of stop telling yourself that there's a greater meaning, that you'll be free in a sense, that your life will be better once you admit to yourself that, hey, there's no really larger point to what I'm doing. I should just do what fulfills me.
The way I'd say it a little bit different, it's kind of the same thing, is that it's kind of in spite of it, that if you are born into a certain mindset given to you by society and go your whole life accepting that, that's not really a hero. But a hero is somebody who understands how it really is, according to Camus, and in spite of that, finds meaning. So it's that in spite of, or whatever.
I definitely enjoy his points, and I find existentialism fascinating, but it's also something that a lot of people personally can't believe. I feel like existentialism is very something based on person to person. Like, there are some people who just, their personality, they're like, I'm religious, this is how I feel. They need to have that security in the there's something else out there. And other people don't and are okay with understanding that they don't really know what's going on. And I feel like it's just an interesting thing to see how different people read this passage and react to it, because some people find it terrifying. Some people are like, I hate the idea of that there's nothing out there. And other people think it's comforting in a way, the feeling that nothing really matters, so you can do what you want. But other people feel the need to have some bigger meaning in what they're doing. So I think it's definitely can be very differently interpreted based on who you are and your personality and your opinions and all sorts of stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wouldn't, myself, I interpret it as, it's not you can't do anything you want. I mean, it's that you're only going to be comfortable with certain things in your life, but it doesn't have to be given to you by environment or anything else. And so that's the meaning you give to it. What else grabbed you as you read this?
I thought like the concept of suicide, when you're thinking about these concepts as well, is very interesting, because like when you're thinking about the absurdity of life, a thought like that drives a lot of people to think, well, if there's no point, then why am I living? Whereas Camus brings up like, well, there's no point, so why are you living? But also there's no point, so you can not do as you please, but persevering through those thoughts and persevering through the pain, you can make your life as your own. So I think when thinking about pointlessness and meaninglessness, does it have to inspire depression? Does it have to inspire negative emotions? And does the word meaningless have to have a negative connotation to it? Or could it have a positive, lighter connotation where it's actually liberating?
Yeah, Camus definitely more has the opinion that this meaninglessness is liberating and freeing, and
Being
gives
a
you
hero.
it gives you freedom to be who you want and feel that what you're doing is okay, and like what you believe in is okay, because in the end it doesn't really matter. And I really enjoyed that point. I also really love the last line, just in his suffering you must imagine him happy.
Yeah.
It's the most fascinating, but the most well summarized, like the best line to summarize this essay. It's the way that he may be struggling through everything, but he's okay with it. I really enjoy that line, and it just makes it changes your entire opinion of the entire thing after you've read it.
Yeah.
I agree with what you said about the idea of meaninglessness, that it's really that in Camus' idea it's liberating rather than heartbreaking. And again, that last line that you were talking about, I mean, it makes sense in a way with what he's saying, because the way I interpret it is that once you accept meaninglessness, then pain or grief or frustration, it can't really hurt you anymore, or at least not as much. So I think that's why he's saying that Sisyphus must be happy rolling his rock, because if he thought there was some sort of meaning, it would wound him deeply every time it fell down because he was this close. But once he accepts that I'm only going to get this close, it doesn't hurt him anymore. And I think he's saying the same thing about people and their quest for meaning in life.
I'm going to read something that gives us a little different, I think, slant on it. He says, "You have already grasped that Sisyphus is the absurd hero. He is as much through his passions as through his torture. His scorn of the gods, his hatred of death, and his passion for life won him that unspeakable penalty in which the whole being is exerting toward accomplishing nothing. This is the price that must be paid for the passions of the world." What do you make of that? The whole thing about passions.
Well, I think it's kind of relating to the way that in life, though, we may have things that we are passionate about and things that make us angry. Like if you have very strong political beliefs for one way or the other, and you're very angry about something, you have what you're fighting for. Even though it may not necessarily help your situation, it still makes you feel better. Having this belief and saying, this is what I feel, and this is what I want to change, and this is what I think we should strive to. Even if it may be meaningless, it still gives you some sense of purpose. So like in his pushing up of the rock, he's angry at the gods, but it still gives him some purpose because he's doing it in spite of them.
Well, he ended up being in this predicament because he was exiled to the earth. for a time, and he enjoyed sunsets, he enjoyed all this stuff, and they asked him to come back. The gods asked him to come back to off Earth, and he said no. And so his passions for love and beauty and all that pissed the gods off, so therefore they said, okay, here's the punishment for it. So that's kind of tricky for me. I think you have to have passion. I don't think he's saying that. It can drive you to some pain, I think. Do you think that's what he's saying?
In a way, I think. I mean, if you're going with the idea that having something that you feel so strongly about that it becomes kind of the meaning in your life, he is obviously kind of refuting that, I think. But so I think you're right in the sense that he's saying passion that so strongly motivates you to cling to one thing that ultimately will cost you because you thought that was the meaning in your life, and that on the flip side, if you kind of refuted that, if you accepted that this is just illusory, this isn't really meaningful, you would not suffer, and in a sense, he would not have suffered.
I wonder. I would take a different position. Does anyone else?
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's more like he's saying that if you have a passion, it's worth going through the pain for that passion. You know, like if you want to do something crazy with your life because it's what you want to do and what you're passionate about, it's okay because everything's meaningless and you'll be happy anyway because it's what you're passionate about. I think that's more of the perspective that I take, at least from my personal experience and how I feel about things.
Yeah, it's like love. You know, if my wife died, I would be tremendously hurt. That I wouldn't be hurt if I didn't have that feeling for her. Mm-hmm. But I would never trade not having that feeling or having that feeling for anything. So I think there's a real plus, but he's saying something very subtle here, I think. So
I think like similarly to that, he's saying that like happiness is reliant on experience. So through these passions and loves and like just these things that we follow in our lives that give us happiness, which would be considered a type of meaning for most people. These things that inspire happiness within us are experiences. However, if your situation changes, as it does with Sisyphus, like your hope must settle in a way where hope inspires pain, because as you're comparing, if Sisyphus compares his past experience of a passion as he is pushing the rock back up the hill, then it inspires more pain.
This is hard to talk about, isn't it? Because the words doesn't. Yeah.
Lots of big words and big concepts.
Yeah, big concepts, certainly. Yeah. Anything else? Just.
I mean, you could take it from the historical standpoint and then say something about the fact that this is written after World War I, after the most horrible experience for the Eurocentric world of that time. You know, and it's coming of a time of a bunch of other existentialist writers having similar ideas. And I think that's a very interesting thing, is how it comes about in history. After this horrible war, these people are starting to question, why are we doing these horrible things? You know, is it really worth it? Starting to question like traditional values of religion and things like that, because they've experienced these horrible things and because they've seen how truly horrible the world can be, and they're wondering if it all really matters. And I think that's a very interesting point of view to look at this essay from, as well as other stuff related to this.
Because he was from Algeria, which was overrun, so his home was destroyed, really. And so the things that he had placed meaning on before were destroyed. And so that's, well, did you enjoy reading it?
Yeah.
For me, it was kind of like the discussion was more enjoyable than than actually reading it.
Yeah, so. It's a tough piece, but it makes you think, and which is nice.
I mean, it's awkward to read, but It is definitely very enjoyable once you start thinking about it.
Yeah. Like it's something that's more worth reading to introduce yourself to the ideas, or be like, oh, I read this and we should talk about this. It's not necessarily something you read for pleasure, but it's something you read because you feel like you want to improve yourself intellectually.
Yeah, I think reading this definitely gives you a different viewpoint, and even if you don't agree with it, understanding the different perspectives of different people and their views on life. The actual, like, literal myth of Sisyphus is a little, it's not as entertaining as, like, other Greek mythology, but the theories and the philosophical value behind it is definitely worthwhile.
Yeah. It can be very dreary and sad, or it can be heroic. And so, yeah, I kind of agree with what you were saying, is that even if you totally disagreed with everything Camus said, it's still forcing you to look at your counter to this. And I think that's very valuable. And it could make another viewpoint more solid.
It forces you to, like, fortify your own values and beliefs if you don't agree with someone else's.
Yeah. So,
I mean, it makes you kind of, one, it makes you reconsider, and two, I mean, it kind of forces you to mentally rebuttal to what he's saying, at least. So, which of course makes you think more.
Yeah, right. So, well, I enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed the discussion. I learned a lot, so I appreciate it. So thank you all. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Join us next time as we discuss another great selection. As Aristotle said, the best way to learn is to get together in small groups and discuss great ideas.